Richard Samuel Roberts was an artist, a photographer, to be more specific. But his day job was being a custodian at the post office in Columbia, South Carolina from 1920 to 1936. What he did, he unwittingly chronicled the emergence of the black middle class in Columbia. After he finished his day job, he would go home and would see people from the neighborhood and invite them to come over to his studio to have their portraits taken. And what he did during this time, he was able to capture the beauty, the innocence of people the resilience of people who were just trying to survive and do well during the Jim Crow era. Richard Samuel Roberts tried to offer people a sense of dignity. Now, these were hardworking people, people who were domestics, individuals who fought during World War I, individuals who carried a gun, women who had common law husbands who were white, who had two separate families. And what Richard Samuel Roberts was trying to do was to capture the essence of these people, to offer them a sense of dignity. We know historically, at that time, our country was certainly segregated. We were living in the midst of Jim Crow laws. And what Richard Samuel Roberts was able to do, he was able to chronicle what was happening in terms of the building of infrastructure in the South. During this time, African Americans had their own schools, their churches, their own cemeteries, their own juke joints, but they were able to exist almost invisible to the white population. Now, this particular work, it parallels the Harlem Renaissance. And we know the Harlem Renaissance, primarily New York, of course, that same scenario was replicated all throughout the country. There were lots of towns and cities in the South and throughout the country that would basically follow the same pattern that we saw during the Harlem Renaissance. I first stumbled on this project maybe 8 years ago. I was in Columbia, South Carolina doing another show, and there were this exhibit of these beautiful portraits. And these were individuals, just common people. But I noticed that there were no names attached. And I asked the curator, I said, well, who are these people? And she explained the story to me that these were taken by Richard Samuel Roberts, who was a photographer in the evening time, but by day he worked as a custodian. And I said, well, why are there no names? And she said when he passed away in 1936, they took all of the negatives, which were on these glass plates, put them in boxes, and they sat beneath his house for nearly 50 years. Once the museum got wind of it, they began to develop some of these images and discover the brilliance of these photographs. And so I went to the curator, I said, well, you all have not told the whole story. And she said, well, what do you have in mind? And I said, well, I'd like to see if I can't humanize some of these characters. So I took 10 or so photographs and I crafted a narrative that was fictional but steeped in history. And for me as an educator, as an artist myself, I'm always looking for these very compelling stories. And this is one such story that really allows us to not only be entertained, but to be educated. For those who may not be familiar with the Harlem Renaissance, we talk about people like W.E.B. Du Bois, Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, Richard Wright, and other black intellectuals of the time. We talk about such musical artists such as Duke Ellington, Eubie Blake, Noble Sissle, and a host of others who were very much involved in creating art during this particular time. So this is a story that will make you laugh, it'll make you cry, and we have assembled a very powerful cast of actors and also wonderful musicians, wonderful videographers, because we have images that will correlate with the stories that are being told. So I hope you will come check the show out and enjoy what we put together as we continue to tell these kinds of stories.